A new film about Brett Kavanaugh was recently aired at the Sundance Film Festival. It's generated a good deal of media attention, and the media attention is coming mainly because the Supreme Court is kind of on the rampage, by which I mean the Supreme Court is making a series of decisions, including, by the way, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, that have completely discombobulated the left. And so there's a kind of almost second wave of rage against the court, and particularly against Brett Kavanaugh. So this is the purpose of the film, is to feed that rage and to give the idea that, you know what, this was a case where Kavanaugh should have been kept off the court. So supposedly the film is producing new evidence. So let's take a look at what that might be. Let's remember that all of this goes back to Christine Blasey Ford, the 50-year-old who sounds like a 7-year-old. Brett Kavanaugh threw me down and did this to me and did that to me and traumatized me, so I've never been able to get my voice back. Anyway, Ford couldn't remember when this happened, and she couldn't remember where this happened, and it was all decades ago. But nevertheless, this is all the left had, and so they sort of ran with it. Now, the interesting thing is that this film, made, by the way, by filmmaker Doug Liman, and this guy, Doug Liman, is actually kind of famous or infamous for playing fast and loose with the facts. He made an earlier film called American Made, which was supposedly the story of a real-life TWA pilot named Barry Seal. But when people pointed out that there was all this misrepresentation in his film, the filmmaker goes, quote, "It was, quote, a fun lie based on a true story." So he's admitting there's really no truth to this. I took a true story and I manipulated it and I told a bunch of lies. But his theme here in the Kavanaugh film is that it takes great bravery for people to step forward and accuse Kavanaugh. And of course, the truth is the exact opposite, is it actually took great bravery for people to step forward and say that Christine Blasey Ford was lying. Many people were pressured to come forward and support false accounts of Kavanaugh. A really good example, by the way, is a woman named Lara Bazelon, who's an associate professor at the University of San Francisco. She's a liberal, doesn't support Kavanaugh, but all kinds of people were reaching out to her in the fall of 2018 to basically see if she would back up the account of Deborah Ramirez. Deborah Ramirez was Kavanaugh's Yale classmate. He claims that at a gathering, Kavanaugh, pulled down his pants and stuck his you-know-what in her mouth. Kavanaugh goes, "This is ridiculous." And frankly, no one saw this so-called incident. And so, interestingly, there was a New York Times reporter trying to pressure Lara Bazelon to support Deborah Ramirez's story. And the New York Times reporter kept saying things like, "Well, why aren't you loyal to your friends?" and so on. And so Bazelon became so disturbed that she found a bunch of other people who were there at that event, and they issued a joint statement, and I'm now reading, quote, "We can say with confidence that if the incident that Debbie alleges ever occurred, we would have seen or heard about it, and we did not." In other words, it never happened. And now, Christine Blasey Ford is not interviewed in this new film, which is kind of interesting. I think the reason that the filmmaker gave up on Christine Blasey Ford is Christine Blasey Ford's testimony was completely debunked by the one person that Christine Blasey Ford said would corroborate her story. Let's remember that Christine Blasey Ford was with her friend Leland Kaiser at the venue where Kavanaugh supposedly attacked her. And yet, Leland Kaiser, who was very reluctant to speak during the period leading up to the hearings, and now we know why. Because there were many people on the left threatening Leland Kaiser. Leland Kaiser apparently had a problem with drug addiction. And so these people who knew about this said, "We will out you, we will humiliate you, we will destroy you if you don't step forward and back up the story of Christine Blasey Ford." And Leland Kaiser, to her great credit, refused to do it. She said nothing for a long time, but then later she said, in fact, she was being interviewed by the New York Times for two reporters who wrote a book called The Education of Brett Kavanaugh. And she said, quote, "I don't have any confidence in the story." Another way of putting it, It never happened. This is a lie. So this is the systematic way in which the left has now become a kind of lying machine. We've seen it on so many different fronts. Lies about Trump, lies about COVID, and here in this case, lies about Brett Kavanaugh.